Good morning. Today I am going over how I built these 3 by 8 foot raised beds. I am sharing all of my lessons learned, including the mistakes, so that when you go to build yours, you don't make any of the same mistakes and it goes a lot smoother and faster. Let's get started.
The key to making the best raised garden bed is by executing the best plan. I have 2 videos on planning. The first is on what is the best size raised garden bed, which has a list of considerations specific to your situation. I also have another on the best place to put your raised bed. Case in point, I explain why my raised garden beds are in the middle of the yard despite being in the Sonoran Desert. The plan is to use old 4x4-inch porch posts on the interior of each corner. The goal is to maintain the full 8-foot distance of the sheets of plywood and OSB and create a 3-ish foot wide bed. I left a little gap on the edge of the 4x4 to make sure it was the full distance of both measurements. In retrospect, I wish I had used 36.5 inches or rounded up to a full 37 inches. I'll show you why this matters in a follow-on video on the irrigation system I chose and why my short measurement added a complication to the installation. The plan for these raised beds is to be open on the bottom so the water can drain out as needed. I'll go into more detail on this when I show you the steps of the build. Next, either take stock of what you have on hand and sketch out a plan based on those numbers, or measure out the area and get the materials to build your raised beds to your specifications. As for my situation, I went with the use what you have option to build my beds, so I started out by collecting everything that had potential to get used and then cut it down based on some similar measurements. There were a few end pieces that I did not have to cut down. That was a win. If you have a few end pieces that are close enough, don't sweat it. Use them. That's one of the really nice benefits of having interior 4x4 posts. You are giving yourself wiggle room. In this case, all you have to do is leave a little gap to maintain whatever width you want, which, in my opinion, is not too noticeable because you end up looking at the plants. And you can put those pieces on the backside. If the measurements seem a little fast and loose, they are. I am working with warped and imperfect materials, so to expect them to be anything other than what they are is an exercise in insanity. As for hardware, I used the same use what you have mentality and finished off 3 boxes of various lengths and screw head types. Ideally, use 3.5 to 4-inch star screws, T25s, since star screws really cut down on the drill bit popping out of the screw head when you aren't at an ideal angle. But I was intent on going through our past collection of leftovers, and I was thrilled to eliminate 3 boxes out of our inventory. The last thing is the tools for this project. You'll need a means of cutting the wood, for example, a table saw or circular saw. You will also need a drill. If you want to get more exact, you will want a square and a level. There are a couple other materials to at least consider, and I will explain what they are and why you may want them when we go through the build process. There is a complete list in the description. Plan in hand, or at least in your mind, it is on to the build. Next, hydrate, and then the next step is to clear the area. Rocks, weeds, whatever's in the way needs to go. Then it's time to collect everything for the raised garden bed frames and start cutting down pieces to size. Wear the right protective gear, with eye protection being the most important and ear protection coming in a close second. If I can do it, you can do it too, but also it is important to know your limitations and be safe. Moving on, it is time to prep the location and assemble the raised beds. While you could stake out the locations of the raised beds, you can also wait until the pieces are cut down to size in case there's any on-the-fly adjustments. Then use those numbers or the actual wood itself to level the ground where the beds will go. At the time, I wasn't planning on putting in a grid system for irrigation, but making sure the bed is level gives you better odds for an even distribution of water for whatever kind of system you end up using. During the leveling step, consider making the area larger than the bed to allow for better drainage. Not just from the bed from overwatering, but from runoff from the house when it rains, to help keep water away from the raised bed frames. Be selective in which raised bed you try to assemble first, so any mistakes are done on the bed that will be perhaps in a location that's harder to see, or in my case, I don't think the OSB will last as long. I was concerned about weight and hauling the structure from the patio to the final location, so I first tried building it in place. It is really hard to get that first cross piece to stay in place or get anywhere near level without having it on a flat surface like a patio. So the first try did not go well, and leaving a second try for another evening was good enough. A cheering squad at the end of the night was a nice finish to the second evening.
Wow, that's...
Go, go, mommy! Go, go, mommy! Go, go, mommy! Go, go, go.
On both raised bed frames, place the crown of the boards facing inward, exactly like Hoover Dam, so the weight of the dirt will have to work harder to change the shape of the plywood and OSB from a rectangle to an oval. More on this in a little bit. Maybe it will matter, maybe it won't, but I tried to be intentional about not drilling into a knot for longevity of the 4x4 supports, as well as to make it easier to drill. Attaching the 4x4 support posts are the easy part of the process. The posts extend out a little further to make sure the beds would be 8 feet long. This ended up being perfect for the irrigation system. Better lucky than good in at least one direction, since, again, I hadn't planned that far out in the process when I was creating the frames. So if I haven't said it enough at this point, plan your irrigation ahead of time. Again, here's the view of the crown facing inward. The 4x4s will go inside the bed. This is the point where I should have installed 6mm plastic on the inside of the plywood and OSB sheets. 6mm plastic will create a waterproof barrier between the soil and the plywood and OSB, preventing the chemicals in these materials from leaching into the soil and then into the plants. I'll add another link to the description for a follow-on video to this one, because not even a month after I built these, we deconstructed them to add in 6mm plastic to the sides. If you are using similar materials, save some time and a lot of extra work, and do it now. Having learned on the OSB bed that building in place was not a good idea, I used the concrete porch as a nice level surface and the porch post as a backstop, protecting both the porch post and the raised bed framing with a spare piece of wood. Consider keeping the 4x4 post shorter than the walls and include a gap on the bottom. My logic is the entire siding is going to touch the ground, so in keeping the 4x4s a little above the ground, there will be a gap to allow more drainage and keep the inside corner posts from rotting as fast. While I didn't pull out a level at this point, I put a spacer that looked close enough before drilling the first rung in place. Pre-drilling the first 2x6 is not necessary on this side, since the 4x4 still needs to be pre-drilled and there is a nice level supporting surface. After making sure the locations of the bed are correct, think about any drainage concerns. While there are many ways to direct water away from the bottom of the bed, you can see here that I put down a layer of rock. When we have monsoons, the water can build up, and this layer of gravel will help the water drain away from the bed during heavy rains. That's also why the beds are built up at the end, along with maintaining level. With more than one end piece pre-cut, you can place one just inside the inside of the structure to stabilize the long sides while securing the opposite end. Now, on the second side of the 2x6, this is where pre-drilling is a good idea because it's much easier to drill into the 4x4 without too much play between the pieces of wood. Only install one screw first to figure out close enough to a 90-degree angle on the plywood side. Then set the next screw. Should you use weed blocker? There are pros and cons to using weed blocker. The positive side won out. The first reason is improved drainage. I put down the rock, and if I just put dirt right on top of it, the dirt would immediately clog up the spaces in between the rock. Second, I know I'm using subpar materials on every side of the framing. They are warped, sometimes extremely warped, so that the dirt would seep out of the bed. You'll see this towards the end of the video. So the weed blocker is more of a lining to ensure stuff stays inside the raised bed. With the weight of the dirt and continued watering, 8 feet is an extremely long run for the plywood and OSB siding. One way to keep it from bowing out is to create some support with a beam across the middle connecting a 1x4 or 1x5 on the outside of the wall. Mark the outside supports in the middle using the 2x4 that will span across the bed. Then, pre-drill a couple holes. Next, place the first support at the halfway mark on the outside and screw it partway into place. Then, keep going into the 2x4 support beam. The second side went a little smoother. Like I said, I'm sharing the good, the bad, and the tough spots. I didn't get a good shot of this, but the middle bar looked way out of alignment, so when it came together, it was a big win. Wow, that tightened right up.
Split really good too.
You may have noticed the second end of the bed is not done yet. Oh no, the batteries died. I did not really intend to do hugelkultur and instead planned on wheeling the dirt into the bed. If you don't expect to put logs in the way, the easiest way to bring in dirt when you don't have an easier method than a wheelbarrow through a side yard is to roll the wheelbarrow directly into the bed. Finishing the bed ahead of time pretty much prevents that from happening, and you either have to build a ramp or manually shovel everything. Do not give up hope on having some ability to dump. The evening before filling the beds, the goal was to put the first rung on the end of the bed, but the battery on the cordless drill went out and my fingers were just done after working on filling the bed the rest of the evening. Now we'll talk about that huge log in the first bed and all this other stuff getting tossed in, a gardening technique called hugelkultur. While these beds are not the traditional mound, this is a hybrid version where the lower half of the bed is filled with cheap organic materials from around the yard, and my neighbor contributed some well-seasoned pieces of firewood. There are some links in the description for you to find out more on hugelkultur. Buying dirt is not cheap, so filling the bottom half with materials that will eventually break down into some highly productive soil is a win-win. It also has the added benefit of holding up the sides of the weed blocker, so no staples are needed. Consider adding some fill dirt from around the yard if the soil does not have too much clay. What you see is dirt from the in-ground bed that I was working on simultaneously, where there was surprisingly some sand as opposed to our normal caliche clay, which dries as hard as a rock. It's obviously not high-quality dirt, but everything above it will be, and it will take a while for the roots to get 12 inches down to this point. At least, I thought it was going to be 12 inches. Dirt day. Get your coffee on, eat a good breakfast, and put dinner in the crock pot because you will not have any energy later, even after a nap. I'll go into more details regarding dirt in a follow-on video, but we amended the dirt we got from a local landscaping company and also picked up some plants to get us all motivated to get the beds done.
Look at these beautiful flowers.
This is honest work. The frames held the first loads of dirt. And then I attached the first rung to the last side. As you can see, even with a 2x6 attached, you can still tilt the wheelbarrow into the bed, and this method worked extremely well to empty the wheelbarrow instead of going crazy with a shovel or leaving some dirt in the wheelbarrow when going back for the next load. A little aside here. Drop a comment if you have any feedback. My guess is I will hear a lot about the choice of OSB, but one of the goals is to use what you have. If it's wood, metal, cement board, sometimes it's just about starting. However, I'm learning too, and one of the reasons I'm sharing my process and thoughts is to learn more from the community, from your feedback, so please let me know. After you are done, take the rest of the day off. This is by far the best example of warped wood I used on the bed. Again, it works well enough by splitting the difference of the curve by not letting one single side be the worst offender, leaving a huge gap for dirt to escape. So obviously, it's time to button up the raised bed and put on the final end pieces. Then you get the seriously fun job of just pushing the dirt you built up in the middle of the bed towards the corners. It is satisfying. Then sit down and enjoy a moment. As you can see, this project was completed by working a couple hours at a time in the cooler evening hours of the day. It is a lot of work, but you can break it up and take it at your own pace. Your only limitation is getting the plants or seeds in the bed when it is the right time.
I tried to stay focused on exactly what it took to build these raised beds. However, this video on the surprises and the lessons learned from Dirt Day will make your first haul so much easier, and you'll know exactly what to expect. Thanks for watching.